A year had passed since the wedding when my husband left on a long business trip to Korea. We live in a small town near Zhytomyr, in his parents' house. His father, Arthur Mitchell, stayed with us. He looks over 60, but he keeps himself spry, broad-shouldered, well-groomed, with that rare old-fashioned politeness that is almost extinct. At first I felt a little shy around him. After all, living with another man, even an older one, isn't easy. But then it became easier. He turned out to be kind, attentive, and with a great sense of humor. In the mornings I put on a light linen dress with buttons on the bodice, a thin belt, and a low bun in my hair, with soft flats on my feet. Arthur Mitchell always watched me bustling in the kitchen and smiled gratefully. Sometimes he would tell me where something was kept, sometimes he would simply sit quietly with a gas warmer on his stomach and observe. "Mary," he once called me when I was washing the dishes. "Will you help me later, like yesterday?" I knew what he meant. For the third week I had been helping him with injections and blood sugar tests. He had type 2 diabetes, and the doctor advised strict monitoring, in the morning, after meals, before bed. In total it came to as many as 15 checks a day. At first he felt embarrassed asking me, but then we fell into a rhythm. Everything became almost ritualistic. I took out the meter, carefully wiped his finger with alcohol, pressed the lancet cap to it. He always closed his eyes. I did the same. It felt intimate in a way that went beyond mere care. That day I noticed for the first time that he held my hand a fraction of a moment longer, just gently, a little warmer than usual. I didn't know how to interpret it, so I pretended not to see. That evening before bed he called me again. "Mary, could you do it once more before dinner? You don't mind, do you?" I nodded. He sat in his armchair while I knelt in front of him to reach his finger more comfortably. His hand was warm and dry. I suddenly noticed how attentively he looked at me from top to bottom, at my face, at the thin straps of my chemise, at the curve of my neck. "You're like an angel, Mary," he said. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he added. I looked away. "Arthur, I like helping." "Really?" He didn't answer with words, only sighed in a very human way, heavy and, at the same time, relieved. I put the meter away in its box, but I felt the air in the room had changed. It became tense and thick, like the air before a summer storm. The next day it happened again. Now he began to ask me by the hour, even at night. I grew tired, but I couldn't refuse. He praised my neatness, my patience, my gentle hands. Sometimes I caught myself choosing dresses with a firmer fabric but a low neckline, or putting on thin stockings that just showed through the robe. Why? I don't know. Maybe from the desire to be noticed, maybe from loneliness. One morning I stepped out of the shower and found Arthur standing in the doorway, as if by chance. His gaze slid over my wet neck and the towel barely holding at my chest. "Sorry, I didn't know you weren't dressed yet." I smiled. "It's okay." From that day I felt that something between us had shifted, and I began to feel a little anxious. A week passed since that morning in the towel. Everything seemed as before, but something in him had changed. He became quieter, more reflective. Even during the sugar tests there was a new shyness in him, as if he was afraid to break that thin thread between us. "Mary, maybe skip the night check tonight," he asked cautiously, almost apologetically. "Why?" I was surprised. "You need it." "I just want you to rest." I was tired. Yes, but at that moment I felt a sting of something unpleasant. He no longer wanted my touch, or perhaps he feared I would feel what he felt. September 22, 2025, 10:02. I was confused. That day I deliberately put on a small floral dress with a wide boat neckline and a firm fabric. It covered almost everything but sat snugly, accentuating the waist. I left my hair down. Arthur had once remarked that he liked long hair. When I brought in the meter he lingered slightly at my wrist. "You look very pretty today, Mary." "Thank you," I answered too quickly. I sat beside him as usual, but this time he laid his hand on my waist. Soft, warm, he said it helped me keep balance, but his fingers moved slightly. Subtly, not roughly, almost tenderly. I froze. My heart thudded in my ears. The meter beeped. The numbers were normal, but I was not. That night I couldn't sleep. Thoughts tangled. My body burned with a strange excitement. I remembered how he had looked at me, how his fingers had closed, how they had lingered at my side. Was it an accident? Did I want it? The next morning he was tense, avoiding my eyes. The checks passed in silence. Only when I was leaving he said softly, "Forgive me if I'm not well." "It's okay," I interrupted. "Really?" He nodded, but I could see how hard he was restraining himself. That same day a parcel arrived from my husband. Inside, a note: "Mary, you are my goddess," and a set of red lingerie, delicate lace, clearly not for everyday wear. A chill ran down my spine. I hid the set in the wardrobe, but the thought wouldn't leave my head. If I wore it, would he notice? Would he react? I shouldn't think that way. I'm married. But the next night I couldn't help myself. I put the lingerie on under my robe for myself, as I told myself, to feel desirable, to remind myself I was a woman. When he called me for the evening check, I went slowly. Every step echoed in my chest. He was in pajamas, neatly groomed. He looked tired but alert. As I bent to reach for the meter, my robe slipped open slightly. His eyes darted there, and he turned away abruptly. "Mary," he whispered, "if I asked you to leave now, would you go?" "No," I whispered. "I'll stay, if you don't mind." He was silent for a long time, then slowly reached out, touching my shoulder but not lower. "I don't dare. I'm not blind." I covered his hand with mine. We did nothing improper, no touches beyond that, no words. Just a look, a hand on a hand, breath in the sleepless night. But from that evening our home was different. After that night everything changed, though outwardly we tried to keep the same routine. Measurements, meals, conversations, all continued as before. But a silent tension had settled between us. I caught his gaze on me more and more often. Not with lust, no, rather with a humbled admiration, as if he was grateful simply for my presence. He became especially polite, almost prim, which only intensified the feeling of secrecy. Now, when I approached with the meter, he smoothed his shirt, adjusted his collar as if before a date. One evening before a storm the power went out in the house. "Looks like the fuse again," he muttered, rising from his chair. "I'll go with you. I have a little flashlight." We went down to the cellar. It smelled of damp and old wood. He held the flashlight, I carried a box of tools. When he began to open the fuse box, I slipped on the wet tile and grabbed his shoulder to steady myself. We froze. His palm landed on my waist. With the other hand he held the light, and the beam fell right on my hips. I was wearing a lighthouse dress with a thin knit, and I suddenly realized how the fabric hugged me. "Sorry," I breathed. He didn't answer, he only drew me a little closer, as if by momentum. My back touched his chest. It lasted only a second. But in that second there was everything: loneliness, the forbidden warmth. When the light came back on, he stepped away sharply and whispered, "We have to be careful, Mary." "We mustn't." I said nothing. September 22, 2025, 10:02. Later, in the bedroom, I noticed his robe left on the hanger. I wanted to press myself to it, to that fabric, to his scent, tobacco, mint, and clean masculine shower gel. I ran my fingers over the lining. It was soft. Suddenly an odd excitement swept over me. I sat on the bed hugging the robe, closed my eyes. I felt ashamed. But alongside the shame there was something else, a burning desire to be noticed, to be needed, even if only on the edge. The next day he stayed in his room a long time. When he finally appeared, clean-shaven, wearing a shirt and new cologne, a pang of something sharp hit me. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better. Only now I don't know how to look at you." "Why look when you can feel?" I blurted out and frightened myself with my own words. He stepped closer and stopped a pace away. We stood in silence, only the quiet chimed. "Mary," he began. I looked up. I will never touch you, even if I dream of it every night. I nodded, and in that moment I realized he had already touched me far deeper than skin. Autumn came soon after. Leaves in the yard began to fall like golden ribbons along the path, and every day I swept them away. Arthur now came out with me, standing in the doorway, watching, sometimes taking the old wooden broom and helping. We worked in silence, but the silence was not empty. In those moments it seemed to me that if he touched my hand, the world would stop. One evening he suddenly handed me his coat. "You'll catch a cold," he said, tying the belt around me. His hands lingered at my waist longer than necessary. When he stepped back, his look was not just warm, it was hungry. I turned away and went into the house, but inside I felt tightness. I was scared by how strongly I reacted. That night I dreamed a dream. I stood before a mirror in that red set my husband had given me, wearing Arthur's robe. I turned and saw him standing behind me with that same look. He did not move, only watched. And I didn't hide. I opened the robe. I woke up sweating, and my first thought was, if he had come in then, I wouldn't have stopped him. A few days later something happened that shook me. I found him in his room without a shirt. He was changing the dressing on his injection site and hadn't had time to button up. I froze. His torso was tanned and strong. There was no sign of old age, the body of a man who took care of himself, and as a woman I could not help but notice. He reached for his shirt, and I stepped closer. "Show me where to put the injection?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Mary." He wanted to say something, but I was already leaning in to wipe the skin. It was hot. I barely touched him. We both breathed shallowly. "Done," I whispered. He turned. I remained half-bent, and our faces were close. Too close. "If you don't leave now," he began. I didn't leave. He did not touch me, but his breath brushed my cheek like an autumn wind. We both knew that at that moment we crossed a line beyond which care could no longer explain what had happened. Later, when I returned to my room, I took off my robe, left in just my underwear, and lay down clutching his old shirt that he'd left on the chair. It smelled of him. I pressed it slowly to my chest, my neck, my face. It was a moment of weakness. I allowed myself it because I could no longer resist inwardly. I wanted to feel his scent, to believe he was here beside me on the pillow and the bedspread. The next morning he said nothing about it. Not a word. But his look had changed, like a man who had understood something about himself and about the woman beside him. That evening, during the usual measurement time, he suddenly said, "Mary, I had a dream." "Me too," I answered. He nodded as if he understood. "We mustn't." "It's too late," I whispered. The last days of October brought thick fog and a raw wind. The house grew cold, and I walked around in his knitted gray cardigan with worn elbows, but warm as his hands. September 22, 2025, 10:02. Arthur said nothing when he saw me wearing it, he only watched. Now he got up earlier than me, made mint tea, and placed the meter on the table in exactly the same spot each time. "Mary, you are like a heart to me," he once said. "If you stop, I will simply stop." I didn't know what to answer. I wanted either to cry or to throw myself at him, hug him, and forget everything. Forget that I am not free. That it's forbidden. That it's more than just emotions. That night I dreamed again. We were in a dark room. He held my wrist gently but firmly. I didn't struggle. I wore his shirt and nothing else beneath it. I whispered to him not to stop. When I woke I trembled. It was more than a game of imagination. The real drama happened at the end of the week. My husband called in the evening and said he would return in 3 days. I froze. My chest filled with everything: joy, guilt, fear, and annoyance. I couldn't believe that this feeling existed in me too, as if something was collapsing rather than being built. "Arthur," I said at dinner, "my husband is coming home." He nodded in silence, then looked out the window. "I knew it would happen, but I didn't think it would be so hard," he said. I sat down on the floor before him, as I always did when I gave him the injection. This time the meter stayed on the table. We simply sat quietly. He stroked my hair slowly, as if saying goodbye. "You are the light I never had. You are the warmth I haven't felt in a long time." He bent forward, his lips almost touching my forehead. Almost. But he didn't do it. He didn't dare. The next morning I woke and he was gone. Not in the kitchen, not in the living room. His room was empty. On the bed lay a note. "Mary, I have gone to the sanatorium I told you about, you remember. I want you to meet your husband calmly. May your soul be pure, and may you have everything you wish. I am leaving not because you rejected me, but because I don't recognize myself and I am afraid. Thank you for the warmth. If one day you open the door and I am standing there, know that I haven't forgotten. A.M." I read the letter as tears fell onto the table. He had gone. At that moment I realized I was no longer the woman I had been a year ago. I was different, a woman who had experienced something almost forbidden, almost like a fairy tale, but so alive. 3 days passed. My husband returned. I met him in the same gray cardigan. He hugged me, inhaled the scent of my hair, and whispered, "You smell different, as if you had really lived." I pressed against him, closed my eyes, and at that moment I felt someone watching. I went out onto the balcony. Far across the street at the bus stop stood him, Arthur Mitchell, with a bag. He looked up, right at me. He didn't smile, only nodded once, and then walked away.